The empty folding chair beside me at graduation screamed louder than the thousands of cheering parents, a stark reminder that to my own family, I was nothing more than an afterthought. But they didn't know that this specific chair was reserved for a man who could shatter their world with a single sentence. My name is Kendra Miles, and if there is one lesson my parents, Linda and Robert, taught me with absolute consistency, it is that I take up too much space. It wasn't an overt, physical abuse, but a slow, quiet erosion of my spirit that started the moment my younger brothers, Brent and Kyle, were born. I was the practice child, the draft that didn't quite make the cut, while they were the masterpieces. This dynamic bled into every facet of our lives in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, culminating in the conversation that broke whatever fragile hope I still held onto 3 days before my college graduation. I had called them on a Tuesday evening, my hands trembling as I clutched my phone in the tiny, drafty off-campus apartment I shared with 3 other girls. I had spent 4 chaotic years at Ohio State University, a blur of double shifts at a diner, late nights in the library, and a mountain of student loans that I signed for alone. I had essentially raised myself since I was 16, but the child in me still desperately wanted her mother and father to watch her walk across the stage. "Mom," I had said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I just wanted to confirm you guys are coming on Saturday. The ceremony starts at 10, but you need to be there by 9 to get parking." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a heavy sigh that sounded like I had just asked her to donate a kidney. "Kendra, honey, look. Your graduation doesn't really matter. We're busy. Besides, you always want too much." The words hit me like a physical slap, stealing the air from my lungs. "It doesn't matter?" I whispered, looking at the honors cord lying on my bed, a cord I had earned by sacrificing sleep and social life for 4 years. "We already celebrated your brother's graduations." My dad's voice chimed in from the background, sounding dismissive and irritated. "We're not doing another boring ceremony. It's supposed to be hot on Saturday, and quite frankly, the drive is a hassle." They didn't see the way my stomach dropped through the floor. They didn't see the tears that instantly welled up, hot and stinging. I just nodded into the receiver, pretending it didn't matter, pretending it didn't remind me of every other time they chose Brent and Kyle over me. They celebrated when Brent graduated high school with a barely passing GPA, buying him a brand new truck. They threw a massive party when Kyle finished a 6-month certificate program, claiming he was a genius. But me? Graduating magna cum laude from a major university? That was an inconvenience. "Okay," I choked out. "I understand." I hung up before they could hear the sob escape my throat. I sat on the edge of my bed, the silence of the room pressing in on me. I felt small. I felt foolish for expecting them to change. But then, my eyes landed on the second ticket I had reserved. The VIP ticket. I picked up my phone again, my fingers moving with a sudden, cold resolve. I wasn't going to beg them. I was done begging. I opened a contact saved simply as J.T. and typed one sentence. "They said they're not coming." The reply came instantly. 3 dots bubbling up on the screen before the message appeared. "Then I'll definitely be there." That was the moment the axis of my world began to shift. Graduation morning felt surreal. The campus was alive with an electric energy that usually made me smile, but today, it felt like I was walking through a fog. I arrived early, wearing the scarlet robe I had bought secondhand from a senior who had moved to Chicago the year prior. The fabric was slightly worn at the hem, but I had steamed it until it looked new. Around me, students were taking photos under the massive stadium arches. Fathers were adjusting their sons' ties. Mothers were fixing their daughters' caps, their faces glowing with pride. Balloons bobbed in the wind, and laughter echoed off the concrete walls. And me? I stood alone near the entrance of the stadium tunnel, clutching my program. I watched a girl nearby hug her father, burying her face in his shoulder, as he told her how proud he was. A pang of jealousy, sharp and jagged, twisted in my chest. I had to look away. I walked to my assigned row, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I sat down, smoothing the fabric of my robe, replaying every moment of being treated like the family afterthought. Every skipped birthday because money was tight, right before they took the boys to Disney World. Every "why can't you be more grateful" after I worked double shifts just to pay my own rent because they refused to co-sign my lease. I sat there, surrounded by thousands of people, yet feeling completely isolated in a bubble of rejection. Part of me, the pathetic part that still craved their love, expected them to show up late. I imagined them rushing in, claiming traffic was bad, pretending it was some grand gesture of sacrifice to be here for me. I kept glancing at the tunnel entrance, waiting. But then, Twist Has Shown hit me like a runaway freight train. My phone buzzed in my lap. A notification from the Miles family group chat. My heart leaped. Maybe they were here. Maybe they were asking where I was sitting. I unlocked the screen. Mom. Kendra, your brother's car broke down in Cincinnati. We need your student refund money. Send $900 immediately. He's stranded. I stared at the screen, unable to comprehend the words. Not a congratulations. Not a, we're on our way. They didn't even ask if the ceremony had started. They asked for money. My money. The small refund check I had saved to pay for my deposit on an apartment in San Francisco. They wanted me to drain my savings to fix Brent's mistake on the morning of my graduation. I put my phone face down on my lap, my hands shaking so hard I had to clasp them together. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was an ATM. I was a resource to be harvested to support the real children. I bit my lip until I tasted iron, refusing to let the tears fall. I wasn't going to let them ruin today, not today, because someone else was coming. When the announcer began calling names, the roar of the crowd was deafening. Parents stood and screamed, waving posters and blowing air horns. I clapped for all of them, my hands stinging, wondering what that kind of unconditional love must feel like. The line moved forward, and I stood up, my legs feeling like lead. Kendra Miles Honors Distinction. I stepped forward, expecting silence. I expected a polite golf clap, but suddenly, the stadium stirred. A murmur rippled through the crowd, starting from the VIP section and spreading outward like a wave. It wasn't because of me. It was because the man sitting in the folding chair next to mine had stood up. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than my parents' house. He had silver fox hair and a presence that commanded attention without him saying a word. He bypassed the security rope and walked right up to me. The audience gasped. A guy behind me grabbed his friend's shoulder and whispered, loud enough for me to hear, "No freaking way! That's Julian Thorne!" Yes, that Julian Thorne. The tech billionaire, the titan of industry, the man whose software ran half the Fortune 500 companies. My parents had no idea who he was. If they were here, they would have just seen a rich guy. But I knew him. He wasn't my boyfriend. He wasn't a sugar daddy. He was the man who had secretly read the scholarship essay I wrote freshman year, the one about surviving a family that didn't want me and had decided to fund my entire education under the condition of anonymity. Until today. He smiled at me, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "Ready to walk, Kendra?" he asked, offering me his arm. He walked with me toward the stage, an honor usually reserved for family, and every camera in the venue turned toward us. The giant screens in the stadium projected our faces, the girl who came from nothing, and the billionaire who had chosen her. And right when I thought the moment couldn't get any bigger, I saw them. Walking out of the tunnel, looking disheveled and annoyed, were my parents. They had come after all. Probably just to harass me about the money for Brent. They stopped dead in their tracks. They looked up at the giant screen, then down at the stage. They saw their forgotten daughter arm in arm with one of the most powerful men in America. The look on their faces was the first satisfying thing that had happened to me in 22 years, but they had no idea that the real shock was just beginning. This story is just getting started, and you won't believe the secret Julian is about to drop on my parents. If you've ever felt like the black sheep of your family, or if you've ever had to fight for your own success while everyone else doubted you, hit that like button right now. It helps more than you know. And do me a favor, subscribe and comment down below I am worth it, along with the city you're watching from. Let's show the world that we define our own worth, not our families. The noise of the stadium was deafening as caps rained down like black confetti, but the silence between my parents and me, even from a distance, was loud enough to drown it all out. As the ceremony ended, and the sea of graduates began to disperse, Julian remained by my side, a towering shield against the chaos. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice low and reassuring. "They're coming." He was right. I saw them pushing through the crowd, disregarding the roped-off lanes and bumping into other families without so much as an apology. My mother, Linda, was flushed, her eyes darting between me and the billionaire beside me. My father, Robert, trailed behind her, looking less like a proud parent and more like a man trying to calculate the odds of a winning lottery ticket. They cornered us near the exit of the B-deck tunnel. "Kendra, honey!" My mother's voice was pitched an octave higher than usual, shaking with a performance of emotion that made my skin crawl. She reached out to hug me, but I took a subtle step back, causing her arms to flop awkwardly to her sides. We were stuck in traffic for hours. It was a nightmare. We didn't know. Why didn't you tell us he would be here? Her eyes were glued to Julian, devouring his expensive suit, his watch, his very existence. She didn't even look at my diploma. My dad jumped in, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder, squeezing just a little too hard. "Sweetheart, ignore your mother's nerves. We're here now. We always believed in you, you know that." A lie so transparent it practically reflected the midday sunlight. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask why they were asking me for $900 10 minutes ago if they believed in me so much. But my throat felt tight, constricted by years of conditioning to just nod and accept their scraps. Julian, however, didn't have that conditioning. He stepped closer, his demeanor shifting from warm mentor to cold corporate shark. The air around us seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't offer a handshake. He simply looked at them, then turned his gaze to me. "Kendra," he said, his voice projecting clearly enough for the surrounding families to hear. "Now that you've officially graduated, have you decided if you'll take the full-time leadership fellowship in San Francisco, the one that includes the corporate apartment, the 6-figure salary, and the $50,000 relocation bonus?" My parents' faces drained of color. It was comical, really. The blood left their faces so fast they looked like ghosts. "San Francisco?" my mom whispered, clutching her purse. "You're moving? Without telling us? But what about the family? What about your brothers? What about the money?" That's what she really meant. "Who will pay for Brent's truck repairs? Who will bail Kyle out of his next mess?" I looked at Julian, seeing the fierce support in his eyes, and then back at the people who had raised me. I stood taller than I ever had in my life. "I'm taking it," I said, my voice steady. "I leave on Monday." My father's jaw clenched. "Now hold on just a minute, young lady. You can't just—" "Actually," Julian interrupted, cutting him off with the precision of a scalpel. "She can. And she will. But before she goes, there is a matter of some unfinished business regarding your family finances." He smiled. But it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, it was a predator's grin. "I've arranged a private lunch for us at the Blackwell. My driver is waiting. We have a lot to discuss, specifically regarding the loans you took out in Kendra's name when she was 18. My mother gasped, dropping her phone. "How do you know about that?" she hissed, panic finally replacing her greed. Julian leaned in, his voice a dangerous whisper. "I know everything, Linda. And by the time dessert is served, you'll wish I didn't." The ride to the Blackwell was the longest 10 minutes of my life, but for the first time, I wasn't the one sweating. Julian's driver had pulled up to the curb in a sleek, blacked-out SUV that looked more like a tank designed for luxury warfare than a car. My parents hesitated before climbing in, eyeing the tinted windows like they were stepping into a trap. In a way, they were. I sat in the middle row next to Julian, while my parents were relegated to the back. The silence was heavy, suffocating. I could hear my mother's ragged breathing, the nervous click of her nails against her phone case. She tried to speak once, leaning forward. "Mr. Thorne, is it? Look, there's been a misunderstanding regarding—" "Save it for the table, Linda," Julian said. He didn't even turn his head. He was scrolling through emails on his phone. The picture of unbothered power. My father huffed, crossing his arms. "I don't like this tone. We're Kendra's parents. We have rights." "You lost those rights the moment you committed identity fraud," Julian replied calmly. The car swerved slightly as the driver navigated a turn, but the real impact was inside the cabin. My father shut his mouth with an audible click. I stared out the window, watching the campus blur by. Identity fraud? I knew they had taken loans, but the word fraud made my stomach twist. I had signed papers when I was 18, trusting them when they said it was standard financial aid. I had never read the fine print. I was a kid who just wanted to go to college. We arrived at the hotel, and Julian led us through the lobby like a general marching prisoners of war. The staff nodded to him with reverence, ushering us immediately into a private dining room. It was elegant, with mahogany walls and a long table set for 4, but the atmosphere was anything but celebratory. We sat down. No one ordered. Julian placed a thick manila folder on the table, The sound of it hitting the wood echoed like a gunshot. "Let's cut the pleasantries," Julian started, opening the folder. He slid a document toward me. "Kendra, take a look at this." I picked up the paper. It was a bank statement from 3 years ago. A disbursement of $12,000 from a student loan provider, deposited into a joint account under my name, and my mother's an account I thought had been closed years ago. "You told me that money went to tuition," I whispered, looking at my mother. "You said the financial aid office messed up and needed it wired back." It did," my mother stammered, her eyes darting around the room looking for an exit. "Administrative fees." "You don't understand how these things work, Kendra." "I understand numbers," Julian interjected. He pulled out a second sheet of paper. "And I understand audit trails. That money didn't go to Ohio State, it was transferred the very next day, to a dealership in Dayton." I froze. "Dayton?" "Specifically," Julian continued, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register. "To Dayton Off-Road and Customs." My head snapped up. I looked at my dad. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a pale, gray color. "Brent's truck," I choked out. "The lift kit, the new tires, the custom rims. You bought a lift kit for my brother's truck with my student loans?" I screamed, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. I was eating ramen noodles and working double shifts at a diner, and you were pimping out his truck with my debt? "He needed reliable transportation," my father shouted, slamming his hand on the table, trying to regain control. "He's your brother. Family helps family." "That isn't help, Robert. That's larceny," Julian said. "But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The truck parts were bad enough. But where the rest of the money went? That's the part that's going to put you in prison." Julian pulled out one final photograph from the folder and slid it face up to the center of the table. My mother let out a strangled cry and covered her mouth. "I suggest you look closely," Julian said, "because the police are already on their way." I stared at the photograph, my eyes struggling to focus through the sudden blur of tears. It wasn't a picture of a vacation or a luxury car. It was a photocopy of a check, a settlement check, made out to Kendra Miles, for $85,000. "Do you remember sophomore year?" Julian asked, his voice soft but edged with steel. "You were T-boned at that intersection near the library. You broke your collarbone and totaled your beat-up Honda." I nodded slowly, the memory washing over me. I remember. Mom and Dad handled the insurance. They told me the other driver was uninsured. They said I was lucky to not be sued myself. I had to pay my own medical bills on a payment plan. "That was a lie," Julian stated. "The other driver was fully insured. His company settled immediately to avoid a lawsuit. Your parents forged your signature, cashed the check at a check-cashing place in a strip mall to avoid bank holds, and told you there was nothing." I looked up at my parents. My mother was weeping into her hands, but my father was staring at Julian with pure, unadulterated hatred. "We needed it," my father spat, abandoning the denial. "The house needed a new roof. Kyle was in trouble with some bad people. What were we supposed to do? Give it to her so she could waste it on books and rent for an apartment she didn't need? She could have lived at home. I lived 3 hours away." I screamed, the betrayal burning hotter than the anger. "I worked double shifts with a broken collarbone because you told me I owed the hospital money. I couldn't lift my arm for 2 months, and you were spending my pain money on a roof?" "It's our house," Mom wailed. "It's your inheritance one day." "It was grand larceny," Julian corrected. "And unlike the student loan fraud, which is federal, this is a state felony with a mandatory minimum." As if on cue, a heavy knock rattled the private dining room door. Before anyone could answer, it swung open. 2 uniformed officers and a detective in a cheap suit stepped inside. The atmosphere in the room shifted from tense to suffocating. "Robert and Linda Miles?" the detective asked, already reaching for his belt. "This is a mistake." My mother stood up, knocking her chair over. "We're good people. We're here for our daughter's graduation." "You're under arrest for forgery, identity theft, and grand larceny," the detective recited, moving with practiced efficiency. He spun my father around. The click of the handcuffs echoed off the mahogany walls, sounding louder than the applause at the stadium had. I watched, frozen. Part of me wanted to look away, to protect them even now. But the other part, the part that had starved, scraped, and cried herself to sleep, watched with grim satisfaction. They were finally facing consequences. But as the officers began to drag them toward the door, my father didn't look at the police. He didn't look at my mother. He locked eyes with Julian. His face twisted into a sneer that made my blood run cold. "You think you've won, Thorne?" my father shouted, struggling against the officer's grip. "You think you can play the hero? Does she know? Have you told her?" Julian's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. A muscle in his jaw jumped. "Get them out of here," Julian commanded the officers. "Tell her!" my father screamed, his voice raw as they dragged him into the hallway. "Tell her why you really picked her. It wasn't because of some damn scholarship essay. Tell her who you really are to us." The door slammed shut, cutting off his voice, but the silence he left behind was heavy with a new, terrifying question. I turned to Julian, my heart hammering against my ribs. What was he talking about? Julian reached for his water glass, and for the first time since I'd known him, his hand trembled. The silence that followed the slamming door was thicker than the humidity outside. I stared at Julian, watching the water in his glass ripple as he set it down. His hand was steady now, the momentary tremble gone, replaced by the mask of the untouchable CEO. But I had seen it, and I had heard my father's desperation. "Julian," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What did he mean? Do you know them? Did you know them before the scholarship?" Julian took a deep breath, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked tired, suddenly older than his years. "Robert is a desperate man, Kendra. He's cornered. People like that will say anything to plant a seed of doubt, to drag you back down into the mud with them. He wants you to question your success." That didn't sound like a random lie, I pressed, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. "He asked who you really are to us, not just me. We have a flight to catch," Julian said, standing up abruptly. "The fellowship starts Monday, but you need to get settled in San Francisco. We can discuss ancient history once we're in the air, away from this." He gestured vaguely at the empty chairs where my parents had sat. I wanted to argue, but the emotional exhaustion was crashing over me like a wave. My parents were in police custody. My brother's truck was paid for with my stolen future. I had no home to go back to in Ohio. Julian was my only lifeline. We left the hotel in silence. The ride to the private airfield was a blur of highway and gray sky. I watched the Ohio landscape roll past the cornfields, the strip malls, the life I was supposed to be trapped in. I was escaping, but it felt less like a victory lap and more like a getaway. When we boarded the Gulfstream, the luxury was overwhelming: cream leather seats, fresh fruit, the smell of expensive cologne and sterilized air. I sank into a seat, clutching my bag. As the plane taxied and climbed into the clouds, leaving Columbus below, I felt a physical severance. Julian sat across from me, sipping a scotch. He watched me for a long time, his expression unreadable. Finally, he reached into his briefcase. He didn't pull out a laptop or a contract. He pulled out an old, worn photograph. The edges were yellowed, the gloss faded. "I told you I would explain," he said softly. "I didn't choose you for the scholarship just because of your essay, Kendra. Your essay was brilliant, yes. But I was looking for you long before you applied to college." He slid the photo across the small table between us. I picked it up, my fingers trembling. It was a Polaroid from the late 90s. 3 people were standing in front of a familiar-looking starter home, my parents' house. On the left was my father, young and thin, holding a beer. On the right was my mother, looking happier than I had ever seen her. And in the middle, his arm draped around my mother's shoulders, laughing with a carefree joy I couldn't reconcile with the man sitting across from me, was Julian. They were friends, best friends, by the look of it. "You knew them," I whispered, looking up at him. "You were friends?" "We were business partners," Julian corrected, his voice hardening. "We started a company together right out of college, a tech startup. It was going to be big." "I don't understand," I said. "If you were partners, why are you a billionaire, and they? Why did they always say people like us don't end up special?" "Because," Julian said, leaning forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "They didn't just steal your identity, Kendra. They stole mine first. But that's not the worst part." He pointed to the bottom corner of the photo, where a date was stamped. "Look at the date, Kendra. And then do the math on your birthday." I stared at the date stamped in the corner of the Polaroid. The 14th of August, 2002. My breath hitched in my throat. My birthday is the 20th of May, 2003. 9 months. Almost to the day. I looked up at Julian, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I searched his face, really searched it for the first time. I looked past the expensive suit and the guarded expression of a CEO. I saw the set of his jaw, the shape of his nose, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners. I saw myself. You! My voice failed me. I tried again, softer, terrified of the answer. You and my mom? We were in love, Julian said, his voice thick with a raw emotion I hadn't heard before. Or I thought we were. Robert was the business mind. I was the coder. And Linda, she was the glue. But Robert was jealous, not just of my talent, but of us. So, tears pricked my eyes, hot and fast. Robert isn't my father? Julian shook his head slowly. No. He's not. And he's known it since the day you were born. That's why he treated you the way he did. Kendra, it wasn't just that you were a girl, or that you were different. It was that every time he looked at you, he saw me. He saw the man he betrayed. I sat back against the leather seat, the world tilting on its axis. My entire life, the neglect, the snide comments about me acting better than them, the way I was always the outsider in family photos, suddenly made sense. I wasn't the disappointment of the family. I was the enemy. I was the living, breathing reminder of my mother's infidelity and my father's inadequacy. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered, a sudden flash of anger cutting through the shock. Why did you let me grow up in that house? Why did you let me think I wasn't good enough? I didn't have a choice, Julian said, his hands clenching into fists on the table. When Robert found out about the pregnancy, he went nuclear. He discovered a vulnerability in our company's code, a backdoor I had built for testing, and he framed it as corporate espionage. He threatened to send me to federal prison for 20 years. He took a sip of his drink, his eyes dark. He offered me a deal. Sign over my shares. Leave the state. And never contact Linda again. If I did, he'd drop the evidence. If I fought him, I'd go to jail. And you would be born while I was behind bars. I was 23, Kendra. I was scared. I thought if I left, Linda would protect you. I thought she loved you enough for both of us. She didn't, I said bitterly. She loved the lifestyle your company gave them. I know that now, Julian said. I've watched you from afar for years, waiting for the non-contact agreement to expire on your 21st birthday. That's when the scholarship started. I was planning to tell you everything after graduation dinner. But then Robert asked for that money today. Julian reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His skin was warm, his grip firm. He broke the truce, Kendra. By trying to steal from you again, he voided our agreement. That's why I burned him to the ground today. I looked down at our hands, father and daughter, a billionaire, and the girl who scrubbed diner tables. It was too much to process. But just as the tears began to fall, my phone buzzed violently on the table between us. The screen lit up, vibrating against the wood. Incoming call, Brent. My brother. Or my half-brother. The golden child. The one whose truck was lifted with my stolen money. I reached for the phone to decline it, but Julian's hand tightened over mine, stopping me. Answer it, Julian commanded, his voice turning cold again. Put it on, speaker. But do not say a word. Let him speak first. I hesitated, then tapped the green icon and the speaker button. Kendra? Brent's voice filled the quiet cabin. He sounded breathless, panicked, and muffled, like he was hiding in a closet. Kendra, are you there? Look, Dad just called from the station. He's losing his mind. He told me to tell you to keep your mouth shut about the investment account. I froze. I hadn't said anything. Kendra? Brent hissed. Don't play dumb. We know about the trust fund Grandma left you. We know that's where the 85 grand really came from, not the car accident settlement. If the cops find out we forged her will to access it, we're all going down. Even me. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just the car accident money. It wasn't just Robert and Linda. You have to cover for us, Brent pleaded, his voice cracking. Or I'm telling the cops about what really happened to your roommate freshman year. The cabin of the Gulfstream felt suddenly claustrophobic, the air thinning as Brent's words hung in the silence. Grandma left you, forged her will. My hand hovered over the phone, my thumb trembling over the mute button. I looked at Julian. His face had gone ashen, the color draining from his complexion faster than it had from my father's earlier. Grandma, I whispered to the phone, my voice shaking. You mean Grandma Miles? She died broke. No, you idiot, Brent snapped, his panic making him cruel. Grandma Thorne, his mother. Julian's glass shattered. He had squeezed it so hard it broke in his hand, shards of crystal and amber liquid spilling onto the leather table. He didn't even flinch. She reached out to Mom 5 years ago, Brent continued, oblivious to the destruction on our end. She wanted to make amends before she died. She set up a trust for you. $500,000, Kendra. Mom forged a waiver claiming you didn't want it, and then she forged a will naming herself the executor of the residual estate. That 85 grand? That wasn't an insurance settlement. That was just the first disbursement we laundered. I felt bile rise in my throat. They hadn't just stolen my identity. They had stolen a legacy from a grandmother I never knew, a woman who actually wanted me. And the roommate thing? I asked, my voice barely audible. What are you talking about? Chloe, Brent hissed. Freshman year, the drugs in her backpack, the reason she got expelled and lost her scholarship. Chloe was a dealer, I said automatically. The RAs found a supply in her closet. Because I put it there, Brent screamed. Mom and Dad wanted you to lose your housing so you'd have to move back home and they could access the trust fund money easier. I drove up there, broke in, and planted it. But I took a video, Kendra, a video of me doing it, but narrating it like you asked me to. If I go down for the fraud, I'm releasing the video. You'll be an accessory to a felony. Your little tech fellowship will be gone before it starts. I stared at the phone, horrified. My brother, the boy I had tutored, the boy I had protected on the playground, had framed my innocent roommate and was now ready to frame me. Suddenly, the phone was ripped from the table. Julian held the device to his lips, his hand bleeding, ignoring the glass embedded in his palm. His voice was a low, terrifying growl that vibrated through the cabin. Listen to me closely, you little parasite, Julian said. You aren't leaking anything. Because if even a whisper of this touches Kendra, I won't just send you to prison. I will spend every dime I have, ensuring you are buried under so many lawsuits that your grandchildren will be born bankrupt. You can't, Brent started. I can, Julian interrupted. And I will. He ended the call and crushed the phone in his hand, cracking the screen. He tossed it onto the seat and looked at me. His eyes were burning with a mix of grief and fury. My mother, Julian choked out. She didn't hate us. She tried to help. He stood up, ignoring the blood dripping from his hand onto the expensive carpet. He walked to the cockpit door and pounded on it once. The pilot opened it immediately. Mr. Thorne? Change of flight plan, Julian commanded, his voice steel. We aren't going to San Francisco. Sir? Turn the plane around, Julian said, looking back at me with a dangerous resolve. We're going back to Columbus. I have a brother to visit. And after that, he added, his eyes darkening, we're going to pay a visit to the one person who knows where the rest of that $500,000 is buried. The flight back to Columbus was a blur of dark skies and silent fury. Julian's hand was bandaged with a first aid kit from the plane, but the blood had seeped through the white gauze, a stark reminder of the violence simmering just beneath his polished exterior. We took a rental car from the private airfield, bypassing the main airport. Julian drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the familiar suburban sprawl of my childhood roll by. It looked different now, sinister. Every manicured lawn and two-car garage felt like a facade hiding rot. We pulled up to the house paid for with my stolen identity. The driveway was empty. Brent's truck, the one with the lift kit bought with my student loans, was gone. He's running, I said, unbuckling my seatbelt before the car even stopped. He won't get far, Julian said, his voice flat. We didn't knock. Julian kicked the front door just below the lock. The wood splintered with a sickening crack, and the door swung open, banging against the entryway wall. The house was in chaos. Drawers were pulled out, papers littered the floor, and a suitcase sat half-packed on the living room sofa. But Brent wasn't running. He was sitting on the floor in the hallway, his back against the wall, his head in his hands. He looked up as we entered. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. He didn't look like the golden child anymore. He looked like a cornered rat. I didn't do it, he blurted out before we could even speak. I swear to God, Kendra. I didn't send the video. Julian stepped over a pile of clothes, looming over him. Where is the drive, Brent? And where is the money? Brent reached into his pocket with a shaking hand and pulled out a black USB drive. It's here. The only copy. I swear. Julian snatched it from his hand. He didn't check it. He simply dropped it onto the hardwood floor and crushed it under the heel of his Italian leather dress shoe. The plastic crunched, shattering into useless fragments. That takes care of the blackmail, Julian said, his voice dangerously low. Now, the $500,000. Where is it? Brent let out a hysterical, sobbing laugh. He pointed a trembling finger toward the master bedroom. Go look, he choked out. Go look in the wall safe behind the painting. The one Mom thought was so clever. I ran past him, down the hall to my parents' room. Julian followed close behind. I ripped the generic landscape painting off the wall. The safe door was wide open, and it was empty. Not a single dollar, not a single document. Where is it? I screamed, turning back to the hallway. Brent, where is the money? I don't have it, Brent yelled back, tears streaming down his face. I came here to grab my cut and run, just like Mom said. But it was gone. He took it. He took everything. Who? Julian demanded, grabbing Brent by the collar and hauling him to his feet. Who took it? Kyle, Brent screamed. It was Kyle. I froze. Kyle? My other brother? The one who barely spoke, who spent all his time in the basement playing video games and failing his certificate programs. Kyle is an idiot, I said, shaking my head. He couldn't plan this. That's what he wanted you to think, Brent spat. He's not stupid, Kendra. He's obsessed. He's been obsessed with him. He pointed at Julian. He knows everything about your company. He knows about the source code. He's the one who told Dad how to access the old servers. Julian released Brent, who slumped back to the floor. Julian's face had gone the color of ash. He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. The money doesn't matter, Brent whispered, wiping his nose. Kyle didn't take the cash to spend it. He took it to buy equipment, he said. He said he was going to finish what Dad started 20 years ago. What does that mean? I asked, looking from Brent to Julian. It means, Julian said, staring at his phone screen, that we have a much bigger problem than a stolen inheritance. He turned the screen toward me. It was a system alert from his company's internal security network. A massive red banner flashed across the display. Unauthorized access detected. Root level. Uploading source data. 15% complete. He's not just stealing the money, Julian said, his voice hollow. He's uploading the proprietary algorithm that runs my entire company to the public domain. If that upload finishes, my company is worth zero. And he's doing it from a location that just came online. Julian looked up, meeting my eyes with terrified intensity. He's using the server farm at the university, Julian said. He's at your graduation venue. The drive back to the university was a blur of red lights ran and speed limits shattered. Julian drove with the cold precision of a man who had nothing left to lose, his eyes darting between the road and the phone mounted on the dashboard. Upload complete. 68%. He's routing it through a mesh network, Julian muttered, swerving around a minivan. He's smart. If he finishes this upload, the source code becomes open source. My patents become worthless. The company's stock hits zero by morning. Why? I asked, gripping the handle above the door. Why destroy it? He could have ransomed it. Because he doesn't want money, Kendra, Julian said grimly. He wants to kill the king. We screeched into the stadium lot. The sun had set, casting the massive concrete bowl in long, skeletal shadows. The confetti from that morning still littered the ground, dampened by evening dew ghosts of a celebration that felt lifetimes ago. The server farm is in the sub-basement, Julian said, killing the engine. Under the south end zone. It's where they process the research data. We ran. My graduation heels clicked loudly on the concrete, echoing through the deserted tunnels. We bypassed the locked security doors with a keycard Julian produced from his wallet, a master access card from his days as a donor. The air grew colder as we descended. The hum of industrial cooling fans replaced the silence. We turned a corner into the main data corridor, bathed in the eerie blue glow of server status lights. At the far end, a single terminal was active. Kyle sat there. He didn't look like the slouching, silent brother who lived in the basement. He sat with perfect posture, his fingers flying across a mechanical keyboard. He wore a headset, bobbing his head slightly to music we couldn't hear. "Kyle!" I shouted, my voice cracking. He stopped typing. He didn't jump. He slowly spun the chair around. He looked at me, Then at Julian, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips. On the massive monitor behind him, a green progress bar pulsed. 89%. You made good time, Kyle said, his voice calm. I expected you to waste more time beating up Brent. Stop the upload, Kyle, Julian commanded, stepping forward. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, Kyle replied. I'm leveling the playing field. You built an empire on code you wrote in a garage. I'm just redistributing the wealth. You're committing corporate espionage and grand larceny. I stepped in, furious. You're going to prison for the rest of your life. Kyle laughed a dry, humorless sound. Prison? Maybe. But I'll be famous. I'll be the guy who took down Thorn Tech. Better than being Kendra's brother. Right? He stood up, and I saw the glint of metal in his waistband. You think this is about money? Kyle spat, his calm facade cracking. Do you know what it's like? To be the only one in the house who is actually ordinary? Brent was the golden boy. You were the black sheep with the secret genius genes from him. He pointed a shaking finger at Julian. I knew Kendra. I figured it out years ago. Mom and Dad hated you because you reminded them of their failure. But they ignored me because I was them. I was the mediocrity they couldn't stand to look at. Kyle, listen to me, Julian said, holding up his hands. We can fix this. Just stop the upload. It's too late for that, Kyle sneered. He reached behind him and pressed a key. 95%. It's done in 30 seconds, Kyle said. Julian lunged toward the console. Don't, I screamed. Kyle drew the gun. He didn't aim it at Julian. He aimed it at me. One step closer, Dad, Kyle whispered to Julian. And I put a bullet in your legacy. Julian froze, his body rigid. The hum of the servers seemed to scream in the silence. Choose, Kyle said, his eyes wild. You can rush me and save your company. Or you can stand there and watch your life's work burn to save her. But you can't have both. On the screen behind him, the number ticked over. 98%. 99%. The cursor blinked. The green bar hovered at the precipice of destruction. Choose, Kyle repeated, his finger tightening on the trigger. Julian didn't look at the screen. He didn't look at the billions of dollars represented by that progress bar. He looked at me. For 22 years, I had been an afterthought. A second choice. A burden. In that fraction of a second, I braced myself for him to lunge for the keyboard, to save the empire he had built from nothing. But he didn't. Julian stepped forward, placing his body directly between the gun and me. He turned his back on the computer. He turned his back on his legacy. Let it burn, Julian said, his voice steady and loud in the humming room. If the price of my company is her life, then it's a bargain. Kyle's eyes widened in shock. He hadn't expected this. He wanted the billionaire to act like a billionaire, not a father. Fine, Kyle screamed. Watch it die. He didn't shoot. He spun around and slammed his fist onto the enter key. Upload complete. 100%. The screen flashed red, then black. Text scrolled rapidly. Data packet sent. Kyle threw his head back and laughed a manic, broken sound. It's gone. It's all gone. You're nobody now, Thorn. You're just like us. I grabbed Julian's arm, tears streaming down my face. Julian, your company. Julian slowly turned his head to look at the screen. He wasn't crying. He wasn't screaming. He was adjusting his cufflinks. Kyle, Julian said, his tone dangerously conversational. Do you know what a sandbox environment is? Kyle's laughter cut off abruptly. What? You accessed the old servers, Julian explained, stepping around me. The ones Robert knew about. But I haven't kept my source code on those drives since 2010. Those servers are a honeypot. A trap designed for hackers exactly like you. Julian pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. You didn't upload my source code to the public domain, Julian said, a cold smile touching his lips. You just uploaded 3 petabytes of useless encrypted junk data to a federal monitoring node. And since you used a university connection to do it, red and blue lights suddenly flashed against the high windows of the basement. The sound of heavy boots hammered down the corridor. You just flagged yourself to the FBI Cybercrimes Division, Julian finished. The color drained from Kyle's face. He dropped the gun, his hands shaking violently. No. No. I checked the code. I saw it. You saw what I wanted you to see, Julian said. Police swarmed the room. There was no fight left in Kyle. He slumped into the chair, defeated not by force, but by the very intellect he claimed to despise. As they cuffed him and dragged him past us, he didn't look at me. He just stared at the floor, muttering about how it wasn't fair. I watched him go, the last tether to a family that never wanted me, finally severed. 2 days later, I stood on the balcony of a penthouse overlooking the San Francisco Bay. The fog was rolling in over the Golden Gate Bridge, but everything felt clear. My parents, Linda and Robert, were facing multiple felonies. Brent was cooperating for a reduced sentence. Kyle was looking at federal time. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see Julian holding 2 mugs of coffee. "The board is asking about the new VP of Philanthropy," he said, handing me a mug. "They want to know if she's settled in yet." I smiled, taking the warmth into my hands. "She's getting there. You know," Julian said, looking out at the city. "Your mother was right about one thing. Your graduation didn't matter." I looked at him, surprised. "The ceremony didn't matter," he corrected, pulling me into a side hug. "The diploma didn't matter. What mattered was that it brought you here, to where you belong." I leaned my head on my father's shoulder, watching the sun break through the fog. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to fight for my place in the world. I didn't have to wish I was special. I finally was.